Hi, everyone. Before we get to this episode of Jungian Ever After, I just want to let you know that we are in the middle of our spring fundraising drive. We have received $7,000 in matching pledges, so the first $7,000 in donations will be matched. So if you want to support Jungian education and support this free podcast, please make a donation at jungchicago.org/give or click the link in the show notes. Thanks.
Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 4 of Jungian Ever After, a podcast about myths and fairy tales through the lens of Jungian analysis. I am your host, Raisa, and joining me as always is my co-host and Jungian analyst, Dr. Adina Davidson. Things may be a bit more somber this episode, but how are you doing?
So I think somber is a good word for it, right? It feels like, it's a very November day here in Cleveland, Ohio, and it's been a tough bit of time.
So today's episode is somewhat synchronistically aligned with external events. This was in no way planned. It just sort of happened with the way our schedules lined up and how we always intended to order our episodes. Having discussed a quite touching story of romantic love last time with Eros and Psyche, we now will be talking about a much more tragic story about what happens when someone has an overabundance of self-love. I am referring, of course, to the story of Narcissus.
The overall question that we want to examine is, why do narcissists hold such a powerful archetypal attraction? What does it mean to be a narcissist, and how do they affect those around them? We'll start with reading Ovid's telling of the story of Narcissus.
So, we've generally been using Edith Hamilton's mythology, but this will be a bit of a change-up. If you want to follow along or reference the story yourself, you can find this in Ovid's Metamorphosis. I'm going to be reading the Penguin Classics version. Liriope gave birth to a child already adorable, called Narcissus. In the course of time, she consulted the seer. "Tell me," she asked, "will my baby live to ripe old age?" "Yes," he replied, "so long as he never knows himself." 16 years went by, and already the son of Cephisus was changing each day from a beautiful youth to comely manhood. Legions of lusty men and bevies of girls desired him, but the heart was so hard and proud in that soft and slender body that none of the lusty men or languishing girls could approach him. One day he was sighted by a nymph whose voice would always answer a call, but never speak first. It was Echo. Echo still was a body, not a mere voice, but could only parrot the last few words of the many spoken by others. When she saw Narcissus wandering over country fields, she burned with desire and stealthily followed along his tracks. Oh, how often she longed, poor creature, to say sweet nothings and beg him softly to stay, but her nature imposed a block and would not allow her to make a start. Narcissus once took a different path from his trusty companions. "Is anyone there?" he said. "One there?" came Echo's answer. She burst in excitement out of the forest, arms outstretched. Shrinking in horror, he yelled, "Hands off! May I die before you enjoy my body!" Her only reply was, "Enjoy my body." Scorned and rejected with burning cheeks, she fled to the forest, to hide her shame and live in lonely caves. Wretched, she started to waste away. Her skin grew dry and shriveled. The lovely bloom of her flesh lost all its moisture. Nothing remained but voice and bones, then only voice. Heard all over the world, she survives in the sound of the echo. Not only Echo, the other nymphs of the waves and mountains incurred Narcissus' mockery. So did his male companions. Finally, one of his scorned admirers lifted his hands to the heavens. "I pray Narcissus may fall in love and never obtain his desire." Nemesis heard his prayer. Narcissus arrived, all hot and exhausted from hunting, and sank to the ground. The place looked pleasant, and here was a spring. He started to drink, but soon grew thirsty for something else. His being was suddenly overwhelmed by a vision of beauty. He fell in love with an empty hope, a shadow mistaken for substance. He gazed at himself in amazement. He saw twin stars, his own two eyes, rippling curls like the locks of a god, cheeks as smooth as silk. All that his lovers adored, he worshipped in self-adoration. Blindly wrapped with desire for himself, he was votary and idol, suitor and sweetheart. Those beautiful lips would implore a kiss, but as he bent forward, the pool would always betray him. He plunges his arms in the water to clasp that ivory neck and finds himself clutching at no one. Nothing could drag him away from the place, not hunger for food, nor need for sleep. He never could gaze his fill on that fraudulent image of beauty, and gazing proved his demise. He stretched his arms in grief to the witnessing trees all round him. Has anyone suffered for love like me? As yellow wax melts in a gentle flame, or the frost on a winter morning thaws in rays of sunshine, so Narcissus faded away and melted, slowly consumed by the fire inside him. His final words, as he gazed once more in the pool, rang back from the rocks. "Oh, marvelous boy, I loved you in vain." Then he said, "Farewell." "Farewell," said Echo.
So, as we can see from the story, narcissists have a strong attraction. Why?
I think inherent in such overwhelming self-love is confidence. Although there's a fine line between it and arrogance, it's widely believed that self-confidence is an attractive trait. So even if they come with added negatives, narcissists can be quite alluring for being so amazingly self-assured. I think even those of us who put on an air of confidence can be secretly insecure. So seeing someone who lacks any insecurity is something to admire and aspire to.
I also think that it can feel like they're so self-confident and therefore perfect. If we align ourselves with them, we sort of gain some of that confidence and perfection ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, for example, someone in a cult of personality, while they are in it and believe everything, they feel empowered.
Right. They in subsuming yourself to a greater other, you feel greater yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's exactly what happens in cults. We can also look at this from an archetypal perspective. Everyone in the myth is in love with Narcissus. Narcissus only loves himself and is completely and cruelly indifferent to the sufferings of others. He mocks others, including Echo. He shows a callous indifference to others' pain. An example of this in our current reality is the ways that Trump expressed contempt for soldiers who were wounded or lost their lives on the battlefield. I'd also like to give an example of someone not in politics. Many years ago, I had a client, a very successful businessman, who married someone who could really only be described as a diva. And they had a child, but that relationship ended very badly. And when they got divorced, he completely, calmly ruined her. He got the best financial and custody deal possible with no understanding not only of why he should be more compassionate to her, but even why she might be upset. He said, it's just business, and left the mother of his child penniless and almost homeless.
I think what's really striking about that sort of callousness is just how stark the contrast between the two sides is. The narcissist's remark or action is totally offhanded and not considered again by the one who said it, while the recipient or victim may be utterly devastated. Echo wastes away in her despair from his words, while he carries on without a thought for her till the very end.
One way to recognize narcissism is to look for people who matter much more to others than others matter to them. So many are in love with the narcissist, but the narcissist only deeply cares about whether they can make use of the others.
So, and this is something that I've been thinking about with this story. What would you say is the connection here to what we call sociopaths or egomaniacs? Are they sort of synonyms for narcissist?
I'd say they overlap a great deal. Egomaniacs or narcissists can be generally kind if it doesn't step too much on them. They can have a basically kind orientation to human beings and actually even feed their self-love by doing kindnesses for others. Whereas sociopaths are narcissists who are also cruel.
So sort of the every square is a rectangle, not all rectangles are squares type of rule.
Right. So every sociopath is a narcissist, but not every narcissist is a sociopath.
Got it.
So one question is, how do people become narcissists? Are certain people just born that way? Like people might be born schizophrenic? Most psychologists don't think so. Attachment theorists argue that when very young children, toddlers, do not get their emotional needs met, they get stuck at this stage. So toddlers from about a year till 2.5, 3 are what we call healthy narcissists. They're supposed to be narcissists.
Mm-hmm. When you say do not get their emotional needs met, can you maybe elaborate on that a bit? Are we talking that they're neglected or not listened to? What types of things are you referring to?
Basically, there's this need to be fully seen. We have it our whole lives, but tiny ones really need it because they can't give it to themselves. And so when they're not seen, when they're not attended to, they don't develop properly. So narcissism is natural and normal and necessary in early childhood. Children from 14, 15 months to about 3 are supposed to be full-blown narcissists. They need to feel that the world, or at least their parents, revolves around them. They are their caregiver's sun and moon for a time. If children are not given this appropriate mirroring, admiration, love, and devotion at the appropriate time, it grows into a need that cannot be quenched. For the rest of their lives, they will seek admiration and love, but really never be able to take it in. A supervisor of mine many years ago said that some people are like a sink without a stopper, and you can pour in and pour in and pour in, but they never fill up. Those people always need more and more, yet can never feel satisfied. And I think this is analogous to, in our myth, to Narcissus's inability to reach himself. He yearned so much to touch himself, which we all do, right? To touch our own depths. But he couldn't. He would reach out his hand and it would just dissolve. Once children hit the age of 3 or so, 2.5, 3, they're ready to both be loved and to start to learn that they're not always the center of attention. When a toddler is not adored, they can develop a hole at the core of their personality. But when there are no limits set, they can also get stuck in selfishness and narcissism.
So I definitely don't think my daughter is going to have an issue with the being adored part. I'm hard-pressed to find a place to take her where someone doesn't sort of shower her with adoration, in addition to what she gets from family, of course. But we definitely need to make sure that that is tempered with her not always being the center of attention. And I think her cousins are a good way of making that happen when we're all together, or when she's playing in the children's museum with other kids, making sure we do the whole sharing thing and having empathy for other kids. That's going to be...
It takes a long time to develop. And Leah's only 15 months old, so she's not even really at the beginning of it. We're starting to teach it to her, but she can't even really start to learn it. So at the same time that caregivers are meeting the normal narcissistic needs of the toddler, they have to perform this tricky balance of gradually setting limits, just exactly what you were talking about, Raisa. The child needs to both experience him or herself as the center of the caregiver's world and to gradually learn that other people have needs and desires that must be respected. Other people have the same feelings as the child, and these feelings are important. For example, your daughter at 15 months is still very much a toddler, but last week when we were at synagogue, she was trying to play with other toddlers. There was a whole group of little ones on the carpet. Her approach to play is to steal everyone's toys. We were already last week telling her, no, sweetie, you can't take things from other people. And we would take away the toy and return it to the toddler who was playing with it first. When she was 7 months old and she was crawling, I don't think we really even did that because she couldn't understand it at all. And she wasn't really intentionally taking anyone's toys. Now she sees that somebody is playing with a toy and she's like, oh, that looks like fun. I'll take it. And in the response of caregivers and people who love her is to set a limit on that. Mm-hmm. That is the loving response. This is the dawn, maybe pre-dawn, of learning that other people have feelings and rights, and you can't just take what you want. This developmental balancing act is partly done by parents and partly done by the larger world. When it happens perfectly, never, in other words, we would expect to have an older child and then adult who can fully love and be empathetic to others and themselves. In actual life, most of us are sometimes empathetic and loving and sometimes not. We're sometimes able to treasure ourselves and sometimes not. We all tend to have to work hard to balance between care for others and care for ourselves.
So I've often referred to toddlers, this was more before I had my own, but as sociopaths because of that lack of empathy. And I kind of feel like there's a grim horror or thriller film plot to be made about an intelligence organization or Assassin's Guild or something, depending on the era, that just trains toddlers to fully embrace that narcissism and never develop empathy so that they can be the perfect spy or killer.
You have a very dark imagination, my friend.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's a thing that's happened, though.
I was actually thinking that in some ways, the way we train elite military folks is not to get rid of the empathy, but we train them to compartmentalize it and to be able to put it aside. So yes, I think it does happen.
It feels like an extension of the backstory of Black Widow in the Marvel films and comics. She was a KGB agent, but came from a specific division called the Red Room that trained these young girls. I don't know if it explicitly started as toddlers, but certainly quite young. And then their graduation was to have their uterus removed so that they wouldn't have ever any conflict of interest that might come from being a mother, from having to put someone's interests above their own, besides their employer.
I mean, a real life example is a cousin of mine who was in an elite military kind of black ops unit. And when he was in training, he talked a little bit about some of the training. But one of the things that they did was everybody in training sort of develops a close friend
Mhm.
And part of the training was to beat the crap out of your close friend. And the option was either you do it or the sergeant does it.
Oy.
And I think it's really a training in how to compartmentalize your care and compassion and put it aside for the sake of the mission. Very, very, very dark, hard stuff that people can do. Back to psychology. Heinz Kohut, the great neo-Freudian psychoanalyst, says that when there is a pattern of failure to adequately love and attune to a child, that child develops powerful, contradictory, and unconscious tendencies towards grandiosity and a sense of inferiority. Let me just unpack that a little bit because there's a lot in there. So when parents don't adequately love and attune to young children, what happens to the child is they develop this very polarized place inside their psyche. They are either extremely grandiose or extremely filled with shame and a sense of inferiority. So the narcissist has both. They both have the grandiosity, the self-confidence that you were talking about at the beginning, but they also always carry this profound sense of inferiority and shame. And they express the grandiosity in order to protect themselves from the feeling of shame at the core of it. In my own life, I've learned that I'm drawn to narcissists because I sense there's this wounding that Kohut is talking about that emanates from them. And I feel like maybe I'll be able to help. Other times we might be drawn to narcissists because we may want to ally ourselves with the grandiosity of the narcissist. As we were talking about earlier, their grandiosity makes us feel larger.
Definitely feels like there's a lot of that going on in the political world lately.
Yeah, yes, and in a very frightening and dangerous way. If we go back to our myth, we will see that Narcissus deeply and profoundly wants to connect with himself, but can't. This can be seen as a metaphor. There is the genuine pain of the narcissistic wound or yearning for something that can never be obtained. An emptiness at the center of psyche. We all have this wound to a certain extent.
I'm reminded, curiously enough, of a black hole. It's a common misconception that they have an incredibly strong gravitational pull. They don't in the orbital sense. It is proportional to their size. There's nothing supernatural about how things are gravitationally pulled to their orbit.
So like a pinhole-sized black hole will have a grain of sand-sized gravity.
Right. But I'm not sure any of that size exists. But what is unique to them is their density. So black holes are so dense that gravity just beneath their surface, so not part of their orbit, but once you have gone into the black hole at the event horizon, is so strong that nothing, not even light, can escape. And that's, I think, where the misconception comes from, is that people say, oh, its gravity is so strong that not even light can escape. They don't realize is that that has to have
touched the black hole.
Right.
And so what you're saying is there's a black hole-like place inside the narcissist.
I think so.
It's a really interesting image.
That just consumes everything that touches it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that feels really right.
And it is extremely dense.
Mm-hmm. And that which is not touched by the narcissist is sort of looking in bafflement. What is attractive about this? Why are you being pulled into this?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that really is an interesting metaphor. Thank you. When are we most likely to fall in love with Narcissus, to fall into that black hole? And I think it's when we are like Echo, when we're uncertain of our own voice and our own truth. Echo's unstable sense of self leads directly to the persistence of her love for Narcissus. she's not strong enough in herself to say, oh, he's not interested in me, screw him. She gets lost in her own vulnerability and shame.
This goes back to what I was saying earlier, and you talked about the attraction to narcissism is just that many of us are insecure. So we're aspirationally drawn to those who display complete self-assurance. I think this happens a lot also, not even necessarily with everyone being narcissists, but just with how people engage with social media or things like Instagram specifically. You look at someone's posts where everything seems amazing and happy and they're looking incredible, and you aspire to that. But that same person who posted that thing could very well be lacking self-confidence. And everyone is posting things or presenting themselves in this way to show them at their most self-confident without the rest of the world seeing their moments of insecurity. And so really anyone can end up getting drawn in by the narcissist who is just like that all the time.
Right. I mean, you could almost say that social media is a narcissistic medium.
Sure. Certainly picture-based or video-based.
Yeah, because people only post the self-confident good stuff.
Right.
And that then hooks other people into this polarity between shame and grandiosity.
Right. Speaking in generalizations, of course, but it is the prevailing
pattern. Interesting. Yeah. That's really interesting. So in this sense, just like the social media poster and the social media consumer are two faces of the same pattern, Narcissus and Echo are two faces of the same pattern. Narcissus is the grandiose, too good for everybody end of the polarity. Echo is the shame-filled belief in one's own worthlessness. Together, these polarities describe what happens inside the narcissist. The narcissist has both Narcissus and Echo inside of themselves. The grandiosity protects the narcissist against the overwhelming feelings of worthlessness. Being attached to a narcissist may soothe our sense of worthlessness, or it may enhance it. It can do either one. It can either make us feel worse or better. It may give the feeling that I'm important by virtue of being connected to the narcissist, or I am worth nothing.
Certainly a feeling which leaves people ripe for manipulation by a self-serving fascist and narcissist.
Absolutely. Exactly. I would argue, or maybe hope, that a conscious awareness of our own Narcissus and Echo places inside of us allows us to be both more free and more accountable. We are more able to stay away from the inflation and lack of empathy that protects us from shame, and we can work on being more decent people.
As is the case with so much in life, balance is the key to success and happiness.
Yeah. So far, I've talked a lot about the dark face of Narcissus and Echo, but there's another face. It may not be exactly bright, but it is certainly complicated. In some way, and for certain people, falling in love with a narcissist can lead not to destruction, but to greater consciousness. We see this sometimes in relationships with great spiritual leaders.
This surprises me because I would assume that would just be a path to ending up part of a cult, which usually isn't considered a great thing.
And enhancing. Yeah, I think it usually is. But Trungpa Rinpoche is an example of this complicated face of the narcissist. He brought Tibetan Buddhism to America and inspired many Buddhist leaders, including Pema Chodron, and founded many Buddhist institutions, including the Naropa University and the journal Shambhala Sun. At the same time, he married a 16-year-old girl, slept with great numbers of his female followers, and drank himself into an early grave. And yet, even knowing all of that, many of his followers describe their experiences with him as being of profound spiritual importance.
Are we saying these same followers or different ones? Ones that were taken advantage of?
Yeah. Some of the people were taken advantage of, some of the people who were simply part of the circle where that was going on. I wanted to give an example of his really narcissistic inability to see other people as fully human, which is key to the narcissistic personalities. They know they are human, but they don't see other people as really fully human. So he wrote a poem about women. When I play with snakes, I snap them on my wrist. When I play with dangerous maidens, I let them talk first.
Ugh.
Right. Women in this poem are objects to be manipulated. This shows his complete lack of empathy for young women, which allowed him to take sexual advantage of many vulnerable women and girls. I don't have an answer to how this works in psyche, but it is an archetypal pattern. Sometimes falling in love with a narcissist leads to us being like Echo, to losing ourselves. Sometimes it leads to greater consciousness and a more whole life.
So when you say that, are these people feeling they were led to greater consciousness during, as a result of, or sort of after, upon reflection?
I mean, and I'm really going to talk about Pema Chodron because she's probably one of the most famous and wonderful Buddhist teachers. She knew all of this was going on while it was going on. And yet her experience of Trungpa Rinpoche's spiritual teachings while it was going on, her experience was that led her to tremendous spiritual insight and growth. I can easily understand how you can go afterwards, wow, that was terrible, and you learn from it and you grow from it. That makes a lot of sense. But how it can be both at once, I find very confusing, and yet it does seem to happen. All archetypal patterns have a bifurcated nature in us. They can lead to individuation or to regression. The rest of the stories in Ovid's Metamorphoses are great examples of this. Some of the characters develop and grow. Many of them become less than human. Our relationship to the inner patterns makes all the difference. Our capacity to become more conscious of our own nature allows us to live these patterns in a way that leads to greater wholeness. Even the pattern of Narcissus and Echo, on the face of it, a pattern of tragedy and destruction, can lead to something greater.
Well, I suppose that's about as comforting a notion as I can believe in right now. I probably will be thinking more about the realignment after the fact than any sort of greater consciousness during or because of, but I'm hoping that we may rise like a phoenix from the ashes in a few years and build a better future. Well, that is going to do it for today's episode. Our intro-outro music is a sample of Seculos Epitaph with the Lyre of Apollo by Lina Palera under an attribution non-commercial share-alike 3.0 international license. You can find the full version at freemusicarchive.org, link in the description. And if you like what you've been hearing, please leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast feed of choice, as it really helps other people find the show. This show will always be free and available to all, but if you would like to monetarily support the show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/JungianEverAfter. Also, Dr. Adina Davidson is a certified Jungian analyst who offers telesessions and case consultation. You can find out more about her practice at adinadavidson.com or her Psychology Today profile. We'll be with you again next time, but until then, we hope your days are filled with exploring the worlds of imagination and storytelling.